Welcome to Preface, all 24 News special coverage of the Algiers International Book Fair 2025. I'm your host, Mara Belawer, and I'm joined today by Terence Peterson, a historian who wrote about the Algerian Revolution and an associate professor at Florida International University in the United States. His work and researches examines the global transformations that followed decolonization era with a special focus on the Algerian Glorious Revolution, one of the most important milestones of the liberation movements of the 20th century. Mr. Peterson, welcome to Algiers and welcome to Sila.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for your participation. Professor, is this your first participation in the Algiers International Book Fair?
This is the first time I've been to Sila. I've heard about it for several years and never been able to attend, so I'm very excited to be here.
And what brings you to Sila this year, and how do you see the importance of this cultural event for historians and writers, of course?
I'm here on the invitation of the U.S. Embassy in Algeria to share my book as an American author, which I published last year, and I'm delighted to be at this event, which I think is really important for connecting readers with books. There's nothing quite like it actually in the United States, where you have so many people coming to buy books.
Amazing. So, Professor, in recent years we've seen growing interests from American historians and writers in the Algerian Revolution. Why do you think this story now attracts the attention of U.S. universities and research centers?
I think it's really hard to underemphasize the importance of the Algerian Revolution for the global process of decolonization. And so, you know, you have so many professors who teach about Algeria and the Algerian War in the context of decolonization, and you've had a growing number of scholars who have begun to work on the country, just understanding its importance.
Yeah. So, and what attracts you in the Algerian Revolution?
I think what attracted me to it was the fact that, you know, it really is revolutionary in every sense of the word. You have the founders of the FLN who started from nothing and created an entire country that, you know, helped kick off this global process of decolonization in so many other countries and became a refuge for revolutionaries everywhere. And so it's just a really fascinating country to see people who built something from the ground up.
Do you have any other works concerning Algeria?
This is my first book. I'm working on a project now that's not published about a series of cigarette boycotts in Western Algeria in the summer of 1954.
Well, a recent book was published of Frantz Fanon by Adam Schatz, an American historian. And Fanon is also somewhat a bridge between Algeria and the United States. What's your take on that?
I think it's hard to underemphasize the impact of Frantz Fanon. Even if you know nothing about Algeria, you may read his books in connection with so many other things because his theories about decolonization were so important. And in fact, Fanon's the way I got interested in Algeria. I began as a historian of France and I read year 5 of the Algerian Revolution and I was hooked.
And Professor, Algeria's War of Independence is remembered not just as a national liberation movement, but as a universal struggle for self-determination and independence, a just cause that changed the course of modern history. So how do you, as a historian, assess the impact of the Algerian Revolution on the global fight for freedom and self-determination and also decolonization?
I think it's vital. Algeria sits at the center of a turning point in the global process of decolonization. It's one of very few countries that waged a violent struggle of liberation and succeeded. And so I think, you know, also because in the moment Algeria became a mediatized topic where everyone was watching around the globe, it had a much larger impact. Obviously, the Algerian Revolution is about Algeria, but the sort of lessons of the Algerian Revolution, I think from the moment of the revolution onward, have been very important for other people's waging liberation movements elsewhere.
And the Algerian Revolution also inspired liberation movements across Africa, Latin America, and Asia as well. So why do you think it became such a symbol of resistance and dignity for so many peoples under colonial rules, I say?
I think part of it is practical, right? There's a historian who refers to the founders of the FLN as method men, right? They had an idea for how to carry out a revolution and build a state. And so there's something practical that people took from that, practical lessons for how to wage their own liberation struggle. But I think it's also such a powerful symbol to have a people who liberate themselves. France, of course, claimed that Algeria was not just a colony, but part of France itself. And then to have sort of the central territory of the French Empire liberate itself so dramatically, I think it can't help but become a powerful symbol.
And beyond the military struggle, Algeria's revolution also redefined the values of independence, sovereignty, and collective identity as well. So what lessons does it carry for the people still fighting for their right to self-determination today?
I think Algeria is a very interesting case because they have provided aid for other revolutionary groups since the very beginning, and so they are a model of solidarity, right? We talk about decolonization as a global process because while it has specific local histories like that of Algeria that are really deeply rooted in their own individual histories, the sort of moral shift on a global scale that permitted decolonization was a collective effort. And you can see that how Algeria carried its role through into the non-aligned movement and the sort of third worldist movement in the 1960s and 70s. This model of solidarity, I think, and winning support from elsewhere in the world is really crucial.
So, and much of your academic work deals with how empires justified domination, often under the language of civilization, security, or even protectorates. So in Algeria's case, the colonial system was marked by repression, forced displacement, and obliteration of identity. How important is it today for historians like you, especially in Western academia, to revisit and correct those narratives?
I think it's very important, right? Some of the figures at the center of my story are themselves academics. And one of the things I argue in the book is that just as Algeria effected a revolution that helped contribute to this global decolonization, the French army also sought to form a sort of global bloc and was sharing ideas back and forth with other militaries. And it's very important for me to share with people who still study the Algerian Revolution, but perhaps through the lens of French officers who wrote about it or American observers, to remind them that Algerians need to be at the center of this story. Otherwise, they're telling an incomplete and very partial story.
So we often hear that decolonization must also happen in knowledge and not just in politics. So from your perspective, how can universities and cultural institutions help decolonize history and education so that colonial crimes are neither forgotten nor minimized?
I think, one of the things academics have to do is recognize the past role of academics like anthropologists and ethnographers. But I think also one of the best and easiest things we can do in universities is read people from the countries we study, right? Read Algerians, incorporate Algerians and their voices into those histories. When I teach the Algerian War, I, of course, present my students with a few documents from French authors, but also have them read Slimane Azem or, poetry about this great poem, Locust Leave My Country, so to sort of make sure that students are getting the voice of post-colonial people as well as Western academics.
Algeria always insisted that memory and truth are essential for reconciliation. So do you see a shift in how former colonial powers are beginning to acknowledge historical responsibility, not only as moral duty, but as a part of building an honest future?
I think in some ways there has been a shift in that former colonial powers are much more willing to recognize the forms of violence that they perpetrated, particularly in the decolonial period. But at the same time, some of the methods that they've gone about it, these institutional histories like the report that the French government produced on the Algerian War, I think there's a part of these reports that are meant to sort of tie a neat bow on the history and say we're finished, right? I think that, again, one of the best ways that former colonial powers can have an open and honest dialogue about the past of empires to invite scholars from former colonies to come present their perspectives in the former metropoles.
And after independence, Algeria became a voice for the global South, supporting liberation struggles and advocating for a new international order based on equality and sovereignty. From your perspective, how did the post-independence Algeria help shape global debates on justice, freedom, and non-alignment?
I think Algeria was really important in being both a refuge and a promoter for these other movements. So from an American perspective, the Black Panther movement found refuge here in Algeria, and it was really vital for sort of maintaining some of these ideas about black liberation that were later really essential to our own civil rights movement. And on other levels as well, if you think back to Fanon, who we mentioned, Frantz Fanon had a profound impact on thinkers and theorists of civil rights in the United States. And so it's I think hard to underestimate the role of Algeria as both a sort of host and ally and as an interlocutor for ideas about decolonization.
Professor Peterson, the world today faces renewed conflicts and interventions, often justified under the name of security and stability. Do you think the principles of non-interference and self-determination, which Algeria has always advocated for since 1962, still offer a moral compass in international relations?
I think so. I think in the West we have an idea that we've maybe fashioned a more humane form of warfare. But one of the things I learned from working on my book is that there's still very much an idea of armed social work that comes out of the response to decolonization that is often as violent culturally and socially as it is materially. And so I think we don't always consider all of the options, and non-intervention is a really critical tool in and of itself.
And also Algeria's diplomacy continues to be guided by values of its revolution, independence, dignity and solidarity with oppressed peoples. As a historian, how do you see these values contributing to more balanced global order today?
I think if you look at the history of global liberation movements in the 20th century or even before, solidarity and support for oppressed peoples are critical tools for liberation. So I think those are vital ideas.
As scholars like yourself revisit the history of colonialism and resistance, we also see new generations demanding the truth about the past. And how can academic research help preserve historical memory while empowering societies to move forward?
I think one of the interesting things about doing this kind of research is that our questions change over time. That's why there's a continual production of research. So one of the ways that academia helps preserve memory is to bring new questions to bear on old topics. And often you'll interview someone you've interviewed before and ask different questions and get a totally different memory. So I think they play one vital part.
Sure, yeah. The Algerian Revolution is now taught at universities worldwide, and not only as a war, but as a moral turning point. So how do you see this new generation of students engaging with Algeria's story, not as a distant history, but as a living example of what justice and determination can achieve?
I think in the recent past, one of the most interesting things has been the way that students and student social movements have turned almost immediately to writers from the Algerian Revolution. I think the theories about liberation, about solidarity that were articulated at the moment are just as relevant as ever.
And finally, Professor Peterson, in your view, what should the world remember most about Algerian people's struggle and the message it still carries for those seeking freedom and dignity?
What's important to remember about the Algerian Revolution is just how revolutionary it was. To have a people come from nothing, create their own country, struggle against nearly insurmountable odds. It's really something unprecedented and fantastic, and opens all sorts of horizons to imagine a better future in a lot of different ways.
Professor Peterson, thank you so much for joining our interview, and thank you for joining Sila 2025. Dear viewers, thank you very much for being with us, and do stay tuned for more series of interviews at the Algiers International Book Fair 2025. This was Mara Balawer. Stay tuned.